Okay, good morning, friends, and welcome to the main object big book study of Alcoholics Anonymous. I am an alcoholic. My name is David. Once again, a blessing to be here with all of you. And I have asked our good friend Brian D. to read the AA preamble. So there you have it.
Hi, I'm an alcoholic. My name is Brian. This is the AA Preamble. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting to our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety.
Brian, thank you. And now I am, there we go. I'm going to ask you to join me in inviting God into this meeting by joining in on the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So by now, I'm assuming that we all know that we are here for a line-by-line study of the big book, and what I will do is put, let's see, what do I have here? I'm going to put a few things in the chat right now, and the reason I delay on this, gang, is not, and I don't claim to be tremendously organized, but it's if you put anything in the chat and then people come in after the fact, they aren't able to see it. So I try to wait until the absolute last minute to put stuff in the chat. So those are the links, and I'll put some other things, the normal announcements and stuff in there later on. But anyway, we're going to break it, as everybody should know at this point, or most people, we're breaking the text down into 5 categories. I'll just put it up on the screen very briefly. And questions, directions, and explanations, promises, warnings, and history. And the colors are the colors that I chose just randomly to that I use for highlighting. So I leave history blank. You can certainly choose your own colors. And what I'll do, the format for today is I will share for about 25 minutes, maybe a few minutes longer today because we've got a lot of text to get through. And but then we'll open up the meeting for questions, comments, your thoughts, all of that. Now, this meeting is being recorded, although what we do now is I'm just recording my section, the first section of the meeting, and then for individual shares, I turn the recorder off. So I don't want folks to, even though we're just doing audio, I don't want folks to feel uncomfortable about that. Now, today we are in on page 10, Bill's story. We're beginning with I had always believed. And this section this is section 8 of Bill's story. I call it willing to believe. And which is sort of a key phrase here that sort of turns everything. In this section, what we'll see now. Remember, Bill, where we stopped last week. Bill recollected his experience of Winchester Cathedral, which was, and I shared from the original draft of his story how that experience at Winchester Cathedral was much more dramatic and much more involved than what we see in the big book. He actually had you could call it a temporary spiritual awakening, but he had a spiritual awakening of sorts, a spiritual recognition, and but it faded, and and so now Ebby has shown up, and uh, and Ebby is talking to him about his drinking. And at this point, what we're going to see, Bill is intrigued and attracted by Ebby's example, um, because as Ebby makes clear, God did for him what he could not do for himself. However, Bill is beset by reservations, some deep reservations. And what he does, this prompts him to do, and this is what we're going to go through today. He does a sort of spiritual inventory, a sort of spiritual taking stock. Like, okay, where am I with God? Because my friend here is talking that this thing that happened to him happened all because of God. And so where am I with this notion of God? And what we see is that Bill kind of immediately affirms his belief in a creative intelligence and an underlying order of things. But Bill draws a what I call a firm line in the sand when it gets to the notion of a God that has a relationship with him or is involved in his life in any way. And everything changes on that front when Ebby suggests to Bill, why don't you choose your own conception of God? So, and so why don't we begin on page 10? I had always believed. Now, for the most part, I'll just jump ahead a little bit. Almost all of this paragraph I have highlighted in green as sort of instruction or explanation, and I'll explain that in a moment. The only thing I have different than that is the very last sentence, which I have in pink for, I guess you could call it a warning. Now, the reason that I have this in green for direction or explanation is not so much that we need to do or believe what Bill is saying here, but almost taking a step back, because what Bill is engaging in is a spiritual taking stock, a spiritual inventory. Where are we with God? Now, and this is not something that we typically do today when we are working with a newcomer. But this is certainly something they did back in the day. Where are you with God? What are your thoughts? And so that's why I have it in green, because this is Bill's spiritual inventory. He says, I had always believed in a power greater than myself. I had often pondered these things. I was not an atheist. Few people really are, for that means blind faith in the strange proposition that this universe originated in a cipher and aimlessly rushes nowhere. So right from the beginning, Bill is putting out there, well, I believe in God, but what he'll go on to say then is how I see that God is not quite what my friend Ebby is talking about, though. Because, as he says, my intellectual heroes, the chemists, the astronomers, even the evolutionists, suggested vast laws and forces at work. Despite contrary indications, I had little doubt that a mighty purpose and rhythm underlay all. Okay. I think what Bill does here is really cool, especially from a from today's standpoint, from a contemporary standpoint, because what he does here is we live in a world that is sort of dictated by technology and science, and Bill acknowledges that technology and science, but the thing is, most people use those concepts or those institutions of technology and science as a means for negating God or refuting God. And Bill does very much the opposite. He uses that those same achievements to affirm God, because especially when you read like the physicists of that day, Einstein, Planck, Bohr, they all talk about that underneath all these laws of physics and the E equals mc squared and all of that, underneath it all, there is this creative intelligence that they cannot comprehend or explain. And that's where Bill goes, which I think is great. So, despite contrary indications, I had little doubt that a mighty purpose and rhythm underlay all. How could there be so much? How could there be so much of precise and immutable law and no intelligence? Like something is directing science, something is designing what Einstein and the other scientists of the day are finding. I simply had to believe in a spirit of the universe who knew neither time nor limitation. But that was as far as I had gone. And that sentence there is the beginning of what we'll see in the next paragraph, especially is Bill's reservations. And so Bill is affirming, yes, there is a creative intelligence. Yes, there is a force. And I'm just going to dive into the next paragraph there. With ministers in the world's religions, I parted right there. When they talked of a God personal to me, who was love, superhuman strength, and direction, I became irritated and my mind snapped shut against such a theory. So, first of all, that's a theory to Bill. That's not any kind of reality. And what he's saying there is, yes, there's a God, but Bill envisions that God more as like, I once heard somebody say that when they came in, electric electric magnetism was their higher power. So he understood there was this force or intelligence, but in terms of something or someone or a force or being that had a relationship with him or an influence in his life, he wasn't going to go there. So, yes, there's something that makes the planet spin, but something that influences my decisions or whether I drink or stay sober, forget it. Okay, to Christ, and we're on page 11 now. To Christ I conceded the certainty of a great man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him. Okay, now what we see here is, and I have most of this paragraph, or all of it, paragraph 3, in what I call paragraph 3, in pink for a warning, because Bill is talking about his reservations. So, to Christ I conceded the certainty of a great man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him. His moral teaching, most excellent. For myself, I had adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. Okay, so he justifies his insistence here on maintaining full control of his own life. And then now he offers further support on that, and especially on his justification for being the sole director and authority of his own life. The wars which had been fought, the burnings and chicanery that religious dispute had facilitated made me sick. And just, you can look in the chat, folks. Just in case you didn't know, I I used my 1939 dictionary and looked up chicanery, and it just says trickery. I honestly doubted whether, on balance, the religions of mankind had done any good, judging from what I had seen in Europe and since. The power of God in human affairs was negligible. The brotherhood of man, a grim jest. If there was a devil, he seemed the boss universal, and he certainly had me. All right, there is a lot going on in that paragraph. I'm while I don't want to get stuck there, I do want to hit on some key points. One of the things that Bill is doing, he's doing several things. He's saying that he's justifying why he does not believe in a personal God, and why that God, even if he did, it wouldn't amount to much good. Now, I don't know if Bill, at the time he wrote, maybe when he wrote this, but at the time he was thinking of this or meeting with Ebby, I'm not sure that he recognized, but when I have done, let me put it this way, when I have done things like that, or believed or thought or said things like what Bill is saying there, what I'm doing is I'm affirming or justifying my own moral superiority. So there's a little bit of ego going on here. Like, I would never do what these people who say they believe in God have done. So I'm not going to go where they have gone. So he's saying the power of God in human affairs was negligible. The brotherhood of man. Now that is, I understood it as a general concept. It just meant general goodness or general brotherhood or what have you. But I actually looked it up, and there actually is a background to this notion of the brotherhood of man. It's not so much a saying we use today, but back in the day, what it meant is an association of individuals dedicated to quote unquote true happiness and satisfaction. And there was this whole kind of sort of mindset based on it. And I put a link in there. It's from a I think 1893 article from the Christian Science Journal. And so you can look that up, and if you want to go further into maybe where Bill's thinking was in brotherhood of man. But he's saying that if God actually did influence human action, he doesn't do a very good job of it. He's basically giving God a job review right now. But here's an interesting part, that last sentence. If there was a devil, he seemed the boss universal, and he certainly had me. So he's saying a lot with that sentence. He's basically saying that he believes, or he's asserting his belief that he may be possessed by forces of evil. The other thing I'm going to say, and forgive me if this is too much commentary here, but this sentence is the only mention in all of our primary literature about the devil, or as we sometimes hear in meetings, the lower power. And I think that there are a lot of reasons for that. And one of the things that I was always struck by our literature is that when discussing God, it focuses the spirituality proposed by our program seems to be rooted in a rather than an Old Testament fight between good and evil, it is more focused on a New Testament alignment with God. And I could almost go so far as to say, when there is talk about lower power in meetings, that I don't refute somebody's wish or desire to believe that. However, that is a religious idea and not part of the spirituality which is put forth in our literature. So it is, I'm not commenting that it's good or bad. It's just, it's almost an not almost, it is an outside issue, which our 10th tradition advises us against. So enough of that, off the soapbox. But my friend sat before me, and he made the point blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. Okay, so Bill has sort of gone through his mental inventory of where I am with God. However, so Bill's saying, here's where my mind is, but sitting across from my kitchen table is this real life example of something different. Of Ebby affirming that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. This next sentence, I believe, is a key sentence. Not just in our text, but certainly in Bill's journey of sobriety. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. He sort of inferred that, hey, we're boyhood friends and we're buddies and we did the same thing. But this is the first time he's saying, like myself. He's aligning himself with Ebby's experience. Then he had, meaning Ebby, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. And this, of course, you could also take this, I have it all as promise. And why I have this as promise is that, first of all, it's a very promising message that Bill is now conveying to us. But secondly, this is an effect, an after effect, or a reward of Ebby having worked the program. And remember what Bill says, and we talked about it last week, when I believe it's on page 18, where he talks about his very deportment shouts that this is a man with a solution. Okay, next paragraph. Had this power originated in him? Obviously, it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at that minute, which was none at all. So now Bill has almost he has a dilemma. Here's what I believed about God, but here's this person that I know right in front of me. He's clearly changed because remember, Bill opens the door, and at least how it's written, Ebby doesn't say a word, and Bill says, "Whoa, there's something different about this guy." So Bill's sort of at this, I wouldn't say a turning point. It's not a turning point yet. But it's almost prior to a turning point. We can sometimes experience points of conflict or confusion. And so he's confounded. Bill is confounded right now. by the living example of Ebby and beginning to relate to Ebby's experience. And he cannot refute Ebby's example as the work of God. And this is where the scales in Bill's intellectual arguments start to shift. So that floored me. I'll just back up a bit. There have been no more power in him than there was in me at that minute, and this was none at all. That floored me. This whole paragraph I have as explanation or direction in green. The previous paragraph, forgive me, I also have in blue for promise. That floored me. It began to look as though religious people were right after all. The door is opening for Bill. Here was something at work in a human heart which had done the impossible. Now remember, up to this point, Bill is saying, yes, a God that makes the planets rotate, I get it. Okay? Yes, that makes the oceans and the tides move, that makes trees grow. But the mind and the heart, that's full territory of man and women alone. Men and women alone. But now he's saying something different, based on the example of Ebby and Ebby's testimony. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past, which just a couple paragraphs before had been the soapbox that Bill was standing on. He's saying it doesn't matter. What matters is the power of this example. Here sat a miracle directly across from the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings. Tidings means news. So now, actually, we're making good progress. We're at the bottom of page 11. I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. He was on a different footing. His roots grasped new soil. You will see a couple times in the book that it's not as frequent as the analogy Bill uses of bricks and masonry and sand and mortar, because those analogies are used throughout the books, but he will often use analogies of plants, trees, that kind of thing, roots, and his roots grasped new soil. So it's not like Ebby rearranged his ideas or brought in some new ideas. He was drawing from, to use another analogy, he was drawing from a new well. So, so Bill now has a desire, but as we're going to see, he's still overcome with intellectual barriers. So in the first couple sentences here, I have in pink as a warning. Despite the living example of my friend, there remained in me vestiges of my old prejudice. The word God still aroused a certain antipathy. And again, from the 1939 dictionary, antipathy, pretty much as it's defined today, instinctive dislike. When the thought was expressed that there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified. I didn't like the idea. Comes right out and says it. All of that in pink. But the rest of this in blue for promise. I could go for such conceptions as creative intelligence, universal mind, or the spirit of nature, but I resisted the thought of a czar of the heavens, however loving his sway might be. And I have that as a promise because even though Bill is expressing a reservation, it pretty much sums up where he is. And as we'll see in a moment, Ebby affirms, Bill, where you are with this is more than good enough. You can make a start there. I have since talked with scores of men who felt the same way, and that I have in green, inferring that what Bill is saying, he's not just saying, okay, here's my experience, but he is alluding to the fact that I've had these same conversations with the people I've 12-stepped. So this is how he's carrying the message. He's doing for others what Ebby has done for him. Key bit of direction. My friend, and this next sentence, or this next paragraph, all in green, my friend suggested what then seemed a novel idea. He said, why don't you choose your own conception of God? What he's doing is he's giving Bill permission to be where he is at spiritually and to proceed through his own idea of God. And the next sentence, 11, or excuse me, I call it paragraph. Sorry for any confusion. The next paragraph, rather, is all in blue. That statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. The key thing that strikes me here is that Bill is voicing a spiritual longing or relationship, but he can't quite articulate it. He says sort of what it may be and certainly what it's not. And Ebby's saying, that's okay. You don't have to have it all figured out. It's good enough to start, because he is saying in the next and the last paragraph we'll cover today. Like I said, we had a lot to cover today. It's the willingness. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to be willing to believe. And look at this, ladies and gentlemen. Now, first of all, I have all of this as instruction or explanation, so it's in green. But the first two sentences are italicized. So that means special emphasis. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. Now I'm just going to hit the pause button there because it says later on, while that last sentence is very true, just the willingness to believe is all we need to make the beginning. It's all we need to get in the door. It's not, we will find out later, it's not all we need to stay in the door. And that's a key distinction. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point upon a foundation of complete willingness. And remember, the willingness to believe, complete willingness to believe. I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. And that is, for Bill, the on ramp to his spiritual journey right there. The willingness to believe. Now, I'm not going to go into it because time wise, we're really I've talked a lot longer than I intended, but there is, if you read into the whole thing about this idea of um, choose your own conception of God, there are some researchers who believe that um, that is not what Ebby said, and it may be Bill editorializing after the fact. It doesn't, there's links you can read about that. I won't go into that. But I think what we can all concede is that this is a foundation for how we live and carry the message today. And with that, let's open it up.